To begin, let's talk about why we should be writing content and language objectives in the first place. I want to begin with a few framing questions to get us thinking about why teachers should think about content and language objectives. The first question that I want you to think about is, what is the purpose of a content objective? Why would a teacher write a content objective to inform instruction? What is the purpose of a language objective? And how are these two ideas similar, and how are they different? So if we were in person, I might have you do a turn and talk right now to talk about your understanding of what the difference might be between a content and a language objective. But since this is a video, for the sake of moving us forward with the content, we'll start to think about the answer together right now to that third question. How are they similar and how are they different? So basically, a content objective is a goal that is written to focus on what knowledge or skill the student will develop as a result of the lesson. So that's really the core focus. What is the central knowledge? What's the central skill that I want my students to be developing through the lesson? The language objective, on the other hand, is asking, how will language be used to engage with and demonstrate mastery of the content? Oops. Sorry about that. So essentially asking, how am I asking students to use language, or what kind of language do they need to have, or do I want them to have, so that they can be engaging with the content or showing me that they have mastered the content. So you see that the language objectives and content objectives are really related. They're connected in that the content is the what, knowledge and skills, and the language is kind of how am I using language to get at that content. And I think this visual, while not perfect, captures a little bit of why this matters, especially for multilingual learners. Multilingual learners are not able to just focus on learning language, learning English, and put academic content to the side, which unfortunately is sometimes an approach that schools will take up, throwing students into an intensive ESL program and then hoping that they'll catch up later when they need to learn academic content. And we know those programs aren't very effective because students end up further and further behind because they've missed valuable academic content learning while they were exclusively focusing on language. So we know that the best way for students, or what students are doing, and the best way to support multilingual learners is to be thinking about the fact that they are simultaneously learning academic content as they develop language proficiency. And we know that it is very possible for multilingual learners to do both, but it does require teachers to think really intentionally about language, to set language objectives so that multilingual learners and all students are developing the language that they need to engage with grade level academic content. So let me give you a few examples of what this looks like. And then in the later videos for this week's module, you'll see some more specific examples focused on content and language objectives. But for example, if I was teaching a third grade science unit on states of matter, I would begin by identifying the content standard that I want to address. Students learn that matter has three forms: solid, liquid, and gas. And from that, I might generate my content objective, which here I wrote as, students will be able to distinguish between liquids, solids, and gases and provide an example of each. So you see that I took something kind of broader. Standards tend to be a little bit broader. And here I'm being very specific about what they're doing in this lesson. They're distinguishing between these three different forms, and they're providing an example. Now, that's what they're doing in terms of content, but I need to think now about what students will be doing with language, or what I want them to be doing with language to engage in this content objective. So if this was the knowledge or skill they're developing, now my language objective might be, students will be able to orally describe characteristics of liquids, solids, and gases using the terms definite shape, molecules, and volume. So here I've identified a specific function or way that students are using language. They're describing, that's how they're using language. And I've also identified some specific forms or specific language features that I want students to be mastering. So here I'm focusing on specific vocabulary words. I want them to be able to use terms definite shape, molecules, and volume as they are orally describing these characteristics of these different forms of matter. So you can see here that this is the language that's being used to engage with and to demonstrate mastery of the content learning goals here. Let's look at another example. So now we have a fourth grade math unit or fourth grade math lesson focused on two-dimensional figures. The content area standard for this lesson is draw and identify lines and angles and classify shapes by properties of their lines and angles. So again, nice, big, broad content learning goal for fourth grade math. My content objective for this specific lesson is students will be able to classify triangles based on their angles. So you can envision a lesson where I'm having students look at different types of triangles and begin to classify them based on the angles that they see. And so this is the knowledge or skill that students are developing as a result of my lesson. What are they doing with language, or what do I want them to do with language? Here I wrote, students will be able to compare triangles based on their angles using comparative adjectives like greater than, equal to, and less than in writing. So you see here, I'm not focused on vocabulary, although that's probably a component of this lesson as well. But I've decided that my main language goal is I want students to be using these comparative adjectives, using comparative language to be able to classify triangles, right? So in order to classify them, I want them to be comparing them using words like greater than, equal to, and less than, and I want them to do that in writing. So here you can see the language that's being used to engage with and demonstrate mastery of the content. So this is kind of how you can see these different components being interrelated. And there also are language standards that you can draw from to help you think about the language objectives that you might want to target for different grades. And we'll talk about those in a later video as well. So I hope this is just kind of a good introduction into why content and language objectives matter, and also some examples of what this might look like in practice.